Eric Jackson here.
And I'm Eben Novi-Williams, and this is the first 100 Days Sports Business Podcast, the Sporticast. Eric, Scott is traveling today, gives me the opportunity to talk to new people. Very exciting. This is your Sporticast debut, I believe, right?
This is my debut, man. This is my debut. I'm pitch hitting today for Scott.
It took way too long to get you on the show, and we're going to do something a little bit different this episode. Usually Scott and I are bouncing around topic to topic about the news. Instead, you and I are going to dive deep into a topic that you just dove deep into for Sportico. Over the weekend, you published a big story about the first 100 days of Josh Harris's ownership of the Commanders. A fascinating look at how new owners take control of the reins, especially when the previous owner, and so many people felt so many ways about him. I guess maybe the place to start, let's go inside the journalism for a second. You've been working on this story for about 100 days, about as long as Josh has been working on the Commanders. Walk us through how you approached it, what your plan was to get as much information as possible from who you wanted and then start putting it all together.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I mean, I started honestly from like a presidential mind. I'm kind of into politics myself, and I just, we know the 100 days, right, for every president is what's on the priority list, right, and who's involved, the constituents, if you will. So, I thought of obviously we think of the fans, of course, but I think of the players. I think of former players. I thought of obviously locally there, right, the jurisdictions and the politicians there. So I was literally trying to put myself in, Josh's shoes, quite frankly, right? And who am I trying to appease, right? Or, rebuild trust with in the community. So I thought about all those factions and really just tried to, break off for each portion, right? So I think I went back to DC at least a few times, 3 different times in the last, couple of months or so. But each time I try to kind of focus on a different group. So maybe the first time, I guess, was more about fans and being in the parking lot, just, some interesting interviews there that I couldn't use, right? Some fans who had maybe one too many, but, just trying to get a feel, right, of their perspective and, so touching base with them. And then, of course, it's, then you transition, right? You go into the locker room and you talk to the current players, right, and how they're feeling about the whole thing. And, some could, you could tell that weren't too really, they're focusing on their job, right? And then you could tell some who were a little bit more curious about the process, too. So I thought that was interesting. And then the former players, right? I mean, they had almost 200 former players there for Alumni Day, which was crazy. So, getting there, that was the most they ever had for that annual event that they do for the alumni. So, I think that just says a lot, right, about where the transition is, right? A lot of people wouldn't show up for Dan. And I don't know if you saw Darryl Green last Sunday was saying, that was his first time in 20 years being there at FedEx, which, another nod to just the new group there. So, yeah, man, I think I just came in just trying to touch every single, stakeholder, if you will.
It's pretty remarkable how, and again, Dan Snyder, who owned this team for 24 years, a tenure that was dominated by bad headlines, congressional inquiries, lawsuits, sexual harassment allegations, just a whole bunch of bad things. In a lot of ways, we knew that Josh was going to get credit just for not being Dan.
Right.
That in some ways the
bar's low, right? The bar's low.
It was a low bar that he was replacing. You start your story with this anecdote of being at an event where Commanders fans are chanting, "Thank you, Josh," at an appearance of his. I find this so funny because Steve Cohen got this a little when he bought the Mets a few years ago and was spending at a level that suddenly Mets fans felt good about. But it's so rare, I feel like, for owners to be treated with this kind of reverence. And Josh got that right at the start. It really, I think, in my opinion, sets the tone for your whole piece, but also just for this kind of weird moment that we're in with the Commanders where whoever bought that team, I think, whether it was Josh Harris or somebody else, was automatically going to get a lot of adoration that I think new sports owners don't always get when they take over for the last guy.
No, definitely. And I think it helps. He's from the area, right? I think that helps a little too. But you're right. And obviously, this is the honeymoon period, right? As we know, we've seen this, right? So we got to let time go. But, as I put in the story, I think the effort's there on, Josh and his ownership group. But, definitely they're off to a good start in the honeymoon, though. Absolutely.
It's funny when he bought the team. Scott and I on the show talked a lot about the kind of big ticket things that he needed to accomplish. They need a new stadium. He obviously wants to make that happen. There's questions about whether this team is going to be named the Commanders in the next couple of years or not. There were some very big things. One of the things I thought was so interesting about your piece is that it seems like in the first 100 days, I think this is really smart. He was prioritizing a much larger list of simpler things that he could accomplish immediately, either by a single phone call or a single check or whatever. Walk us through some of those things, the things that maybe most fans didn't realize or didn't hear about that actually does make a difference with these constituents that you're talking about.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I think maybe the smaller things in maybe Josh's mind is like things you could see immediately changing, right? Like, the big things are going to take a while, right? But the smaller things. So, man, it's crazy because it's everything from new stoves, the new hot tubs. So Josh and Mitch Rails, right? They sat down with players for private dinners as well as lunches, right? So, and I think in those feedbacks, the players were like, "Look, we need more hot tubs for recovery and other things." Immediately, they go and expand the hot tubs, right? Hey, we need a luxury tent for after the games, my family. Just have a more private place to kind of congregate. And then sure enough, in Lot B, the players' lot, now there's a luxury tent, right? So I think those are sort of the things from the players' standpoint. And then from the fans, Josh was kind of mentioning some of the things he maybe wasn't prepared for was like getting phone calls about, the leaks that are happening in the restrooms and stuff and the plumbing. So there's already been those investments to fix those things. Things that, a fan might not, I guess, realize, but those are expensive sort of infrastructure things that are already being taken place. And, FedEx, right, was built in 97, right? So there's, it's definitely, they're putting the Band-Aid on, if you will, but right now, so that's kind of the things, I really just think that were really interesting that he immediately wanted to come in and fix from an infrastructure standpoint. And then the players, right, the 40-second play clock. I know Eric Bieniemy is trying to get his
That's at the practice facility, right?
Right, at the practice facility, the 40-second play clock. I thought that was really interesting. And then you also see there's more investment that you're seeing like in the analytics and the scouting side as well, I guess, after talking to the GM there, Mayhew. So, yeah, it's from a football standpoint and a fan standpoint. I think Josh immediately was just trying to have some sort of things you can touch and see immediately, right? And I think the bigger things, new stadium and, we'll see with the name change, but some of those bigger things, I think it will take some time, but,
He even changed traffic patterns, right? Getting in and out of the stadium. I thought that was fascinating also.
Yeah, working with the state, the local and federal, right? And I don't know if that's something Dan would have been able to pull off, right?
My gut says no. Yeah, not a lot of good favor or good political will for Dan in that city right now. Yeah,
so, and I think and they said the team is saying that's helped ingress, cut the time by like roughly 40 minutes, right? So those are just some of the things that immediately you can come in and fix. They expanded the kitchen, and I know they're working with some of their third-party vendors as well. So yeah, those are just all those things. And one thing I thought was interesting. So they used to have executive suites, right? For at FedEx Field, for people who work there, right? And the business executives and everybody go in during the game. And there's so much demand now for premium areas that they've taken those spaces and literally changed them out. So, and like I mentioned in the story, that's one of those problems you want to have, right? They got to go find a place to hang out, a new place to hang out during the games. But it's a good problem to have that people want demand in those areas, and so.
That reminds me of earlier this year. You and I were at LAFC Stadium, and they were talking about when Messi comes to play, how things that are not ticketed areas all the time might become ticketed areas for that one game because there's so much pressure, there's so much demand for seats. It's such a good problem to have, right? When you're like, well, what else can we sell because we have all these people that want to buy it. And you write in your story that at some point early this year, the Commanders had topped the NFL in new club ticket sales, right?
Right.
So that is in some ways rubber meeting the road, the easy obvious through line there that there's a lot more demand. They found new inventory, as you're saying, and that is proof in the pudding, at least, that some of these things are working. I think this is a really smart move by the Harris Group to get these small wins, right? What does a new luxury tent for players cost? What does a 40-second play clock at the practice facility cost? Like, these are not huge line items, but they do engender a lot of goodwill right at the start. Another thing I want to ask you about the ownership group. It's 20 plus people, including Magic Johnson, who becomes one of a fairly small group of black minority owners in the NFL. I know you spent some time with Magic as well. What's your read on beyond Josh, the ownership group as a whole, and maybe spend some time on Magic specifically in terms of what someone like him, who well-known athlete, well-known post-career as a businessman, what he brings to a group like this at this time?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, and I mentioned the story here, I think Magic's personality, if you haven't seen him before or been around him before, it's larger than life, right?
It's big,
yeah.
It's bigger than he is, and he's huge. Yeah.
Right, and I think, and that's helpful internally in getting staffers and other people. Magic's one of those people who, is really generous with his time, and is, will talk to anybody from lower level staffer, it just really doesn't matter. So I think that's really helpful from an internal standpoint, but also externally, Magic's already gone out to, different neighborhoods, especially predominantly black ones. And he's already been out there front and center and almost like a politician, really, in a lot of ways. And, just being there. And I think that's just a good representation for people in just the area to see. It is Chocolate City, right? So
yeah.
I think I met some people in D.C. who were never Commanders fans ever. And they were like, well, Magic's on board. Maybe I will start to be a Commanders fan now, right? And I think that's just really interesting how someone like Magic can just completely just make you more interested in the team that's always been around. These are DC natives that I talk to, and now they're starting to take an interest, right? And I saw a lot of young kids that Magic talked to, and it's really tapping that next generation, right? I think he was talking to like the middle school and really young kids, and it sounds cheesy, but those kind of moments where I think a young kid can kind of capture that with Magic and have that moment. You can be a Commanders fan for life after that, So and I know Josh and them are thinking in those, now obviously they're focused on the broader community, not just the black community, but I think that's definitely a benefit having someone like Magic a part of your group.
I think Forbes just said Magic was a billionaire. I think that happened this week. So he obviously has a lot of money. He's been very successful after his NBA career. I still think there's a lot of people who see these celebrity minority investments in teams, Jay-Z in the Nets, for example, and kind of roll their eyes, and they're like, what is he buying? Like a 1%? Like, what is he actually bringing? I think what you just said answers that question, right? Magic is obviously, the economics are going to work out well for him. Buying an NFL team always does, but Magic is uniquely suited, I think, in a lot of ways, especially in a sport like football where there are very few black minority owners. I think he brings so much to the table in terms of what you said, reaching those communities, and then also when the stadium talks start to happen, who do I want meeting with politicians? I don't want Josh Harris meeting with politicians. I want Magic Johnson meeting with politicians, right? Like he has a charisma, he has an ability to command a room that I think is exactly what you want on the front line of some of those discussions.
Yeah, and even the players, right? Like Terry McLaurin has already said, he's already had that really good dialogue and conversation with Magic. And, I know Magic went to some practices last month, and they're asking him everything, business tips, what's it like in the NBA, just, and I think it's rare that you see active players, looking up to owner with athletic advice.
Great point. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just like, I think that's just super rare. And
Michael Jordan probably achieved that in the NBA,
right.
But you're right. It's probably actually fairly rare. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, Magic's offered to be sort of a mentor to the players already, and we'll see how much he can do. Obviously the NFL has their own rules on business, and what you can investment wise, what you can help with, I guess, and how close you can get to it all. But Magic's certainly a resource there, and I think guys will definitely listen to some of those business tips.
So let's talk about the commercial opportunities here. The way the NFL works, every team gets a pretty huge check of the national revenue, and what sets teams apart business wise is what they're able to generate locally. And the Commanders in recent years have really struggled in that regard. I think by estimates they're 22nd or 21st in national or in local revenue ranking across the NFL. They were once top 5 from what I understand. When Dan bought this team, it was the most valuable sports team in the world. I will say that again. In 1999, when Dan Snyder bought this team, it was the most valuable sports team in the world. It's probably not top 10 right now, or if it is, it's right at the end of that. But the team, as you say in your story, signed 12 new sponsors or 12 extensions and new sponsors in just in the first 100 days. What did you get a sense about the business growth or business changes that the team has already seen in these first 100 days?
Yeah, well, I think like Anheuser-Busch coming back into the fold says a lot too, right? And, and I know Jason, I spoke with him, and I know they're hoping. So the new ownership group got there right before training camp, right? So they were in an awkward point in the sponsorship cycle.
Yeah.
So they're really hoping to rev up in this next cycle. 12 is really good, but I think they're really ambitious for this next one coming around because they have open categories, right, still. So I think, and I think Josh would even say this, they've done well, but I think even this next one coming around with a little more runway, I think they have a lot of opportunity there. And, I think it's been really smart that the way they've made some changes around the stadium, like the new scoreboards that have come in are wider, right? So you can create more assets, more space for assets, right? So another value proposition to sponsors, right? So they can place their branding or whatever on the new scoreboards, just little things like that just create more value for sponsors. And they're, I believe their scoreboard was grandfathered in. There's a certain height that new scoreboards have to abide by, but FedEx is kind of grandfathered in. So, that's another opportunity to take advantage of that with, more sponsors getting branding there. And so, it's been you could just totally tell, I think Tad explained to me, like a breath of fresh air just going back into the market and under new ownership. And plus, I think one thing is interesting too with HBSC, the parent company Josh's for the Sixers and Devils.
Yeah.
They can leverage that connectivity too, right? So, we don't have a sponsor yet that is with the Devils sponsor of the Devils, Sixers, Commanders yet, but I wouldn't be surprised soon that you start to see, some of these deals that can connect across the different brands there. So.
When Josh's group was raising money for this bid, there was a document that they were sharing with prospective investors. I have seen that document. I took some notes off of it when I looked at it, and some things that jump out to me now that we're having this conversation. I wrote some of these down. The local sponsorship revenue that they had written in for last year, they had around $52 million. The base case for this year was $55 million. Something tells me that in the 12 new sponsorship deals, maybe they got a little bit more than a $3 million bump. So they're probably doing pretty well there. The ranking for the team in local revenue, they project in the next 10 years to go from 22nd to 6th. The upside case, so the high end case with a new stadium, they project that as 3rd in the league, right? So there's some really high revenue target expectations here. And then in valuation, they had this as a 10-year hold. So if they were to sell the team in 10 years, the base case they had as the Commanders worth $15 billion in 2032. The upside case had this team at $19 billion after the 10-year hold. And it's fascinating. We don't actually get too often the actual kind of projections of NFL ownership groups in terms of what they expect. But I see two things in those numbers, and I want to get your thoughts. The first thing I see is there was meat on the bone in Washington that he believed that they were going to be able to get very quickly. And then secondly, that the NFL is a business that is going to continue to grow at very, very fast exponential rates over the next decade, as we've seen in the past 2 decades. So I think it's two things. I think it is an opportunity specifically in Washington, and then also just NFL ownership on the national scale.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's funny you said, it's like, because right now, they're 20-something right now in local revenue, but
22nd, yeah.
That's still pretty dang good, though, thinking of the overall being in the NFL, right? So it's
teams in any other league would love to have the local revenue of the Commanders, even last year. Yeah.
So it's like so relative, right? But yeah, no, and I mentioned the story here. They're hoping to double that, right? Which I'm sure they will by the end of the decade, and if they get the new stadium, which seems inevitable, those numbers can look, considerably more, right? So, and kind of the things we mentioned, right, in the stadium series we did, if they can get potentially a smaller stadium, right, and, charge premium and be operating that, and those are whole opportunities there once the stadium comes on board. But yeah, no, there's so much runway, and I think that you said it well. There was meat on the bone to begin with, right? I don't think Josh does this deal if he didn't feel like, he could really take advantage and make the most out of that. So
Scott always likes to say that the new owners don't want turnkey, that they want to buy something that they have some room to kind of pull some strings, put their own stamp on. And the Commanders feel like the perfect opportunity for that, right?
Yeah.
Again, but because of the previous ownership group, because things had fallen so much in terms of attendance, in terms of gate revenue, sponsorship, et cetera, this feels like the perfect opportunity there. I want to go back to something you said a couple minutes ago. You mentioned HBSE. That is Harris Blitzer Sports and Entertainment. It is the group that owns the 76ers and the Devils, the now partner teams in some ways to the Washington Commanders. What did you get in your reporting understanding of what the relationship is like there? Are they sharing executives? Are they sharing ideas? You mentioned potentially sharing partners at some sort. I think there's still a lot of confusion out there about what the relationship is between the rest of the Harris portfolio relative to the Commanders.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And that was one of the main priorities when I started this reporting process, that I really wanted to try to get as clear as possible. And Tad Brown, the HBSC CEO, will be there to support Jason, and Jason's not reporting to Tad or anything like that. But
that's Jason Wright, who runs the president of the Commanders.
President of the Commanders.
Yeah.
But they're there as a support system for sure, and there'll be shared services, right? Financial, legal, and obviously the legal situation is different than the Commanders, than the Sixers and the Devils, but there'll be a lot of those kind of shared services there. And I think one thing that was interesting is, recently, within weeks, they had the big on-site meeting at the Prudential Center, right? And that had executives from the Sixers, Devils, Commanders. And, when these things happen, I think of like only senior level people are coming together. But no, it was, even lower level executives, your counterpart of the other team. What can we learn from? What do you do? Maybe we can, you even at the operations level, you had Daryl Morey, right, the GM, talking with the Mayhew with the Commanders GM, so even the general managers of the team, right, like we're not even talking executives, but even the GMs of the teams are trading notes, right. So I think, and everybody, it's all reported back up, right. I think to Blitz and then of course the Jots, but yeah, I think that's really interesting how they are all coming under this umbrella, and for Jason, I'm sure it's different than what it was like before. I'm sure he's under his own, transition himself, working for a whole new organization in that sense.
The tentacles of this ownership group are wild, right?
Yeah.
So David Blitzer, who is the partner in HBSE, is a minority investor in the Commanders. He is, we think, the first human to have equity stakes in teams in all 5 major U.S. leagues.
Sports fan dream.
And he owns 8 or 9 European soccer teams at this point. He and Josh are both partners in Crystal Palace, an English Premier League team. Just between the two of them, there's franchise ownership in like 15, 20 different teams. They are trying to get a new arena in Philadelphia, which I know you've written about.
Yeah.
So they're going to be trying on 2 fronts to be getting new buildings at some point soon in DC and in Philadelphia. Yeah. The learnings, all of the stuff that you're talking about. If you want to expand the portfolio, the Arctos Sports Partners, the sports-based private equity fund that we talk about a lot, has done 20 plus deals in sports. They are invested in HBSE, not invested in the Commanders because it's not allowed, but obviously their relationship is there to a degree. If you want to pull the threads on this ownership group and the many, many, many other sports assets that they have, it really is quite a fascinating look at modern sports ownership. Yeah,
I mean, you didn't even get into like women's skating rink, and you have the Ripken at the youth level. I mean, and Crystal Palace executives were at this on-site meeting too. So you have even teams that Blitzer is invested in solely, who are also a part of this mix, right? So it's really interesting to see how all of those are sort of working together, even though Commanders aren't under the HBSE umbrella technically. They're all still working, and it's crazy to me. I wonder some days what a day with like Josh. Take it a Tuesday when he's trading James Harden, PJ Tucker, Montez Sweat, Chase Young, all within hours of each other. It's I'm curious what a day is like that over there. So it's
was it your story where Josh mentioned how much he's working? I read somewhere that he's working like 90 hours a week now or something like that.
Yeah, he mentioned that at the Economic Club.
Incomprehensible amount of hours right now.
Well, Josh says he likes to work, so he's certainly doing that.
Amazing. So I'll put you on the hot seat here on a few things. One, Commander's name. What do you think? Do you think that the name sticks around, or do you think this group goes a different direction at some point?
I think the name ends up staying.
Okay.
I do think if I'm a betting man, which I'm not, but I do, I think the name ends up staying. But, I know that they have, gone out, tested out, right, but we know the last name's not coming back, and they've made that very clear.
Of course, that seems clear, yeah.
And I'm sure, if you spend $6 billion on on an asset, it's hard not to reconsider every aspect, including the name, right? So,
yeah.
But I do think the name is going to end up staying, but we shall see.
Okay, and then stadium, I know there's a bunch of different locations, there's different time frames. When this team moves, where do you think that stadium is, and roughly what year do you think?
Wow. Well, I definitely think by 2030, I think the Commanders will be maybe even a year or two inside of. I mean, what do we got right now? The Titans are scheduled for 27.
And the Bills are the same year maybe, or a year before perhaps?
So I would say, by 2030, they should be comfortable in their new place. But, I know. No, I know everything's on the table. And all three jurisdictions have raised their hand to be like, hey, come over here. And, so I think the best public partnership that they can get, I think, and Josh, and you've seen his, kind of the way he invests and just being careful and that sort of getting the most value, right? I think that's just important to him. So I think that's going to probably what comes down to it at the end of the day. Obviously other things, but I think that's going to be really key. I know a lot of people would love to see RFK Stadium. I talked to Mark Ripon about this. A lot of people who played at RFK would love to see the Commanders come back, but there's a lot of questions about the infrastructure of that site and obviously the surrounding neighborhoods as well. So, and Josh grew up, and him and Mark, Ian, and others grew up going to RFK. So I'm sure that would be nice to them to come back there. But at the same time, you got to get the best business opportunity too. So.
And then one more for you. Last year, Commanders were dead last in NFL attendance, about 58,000 fans a game. Right now, they're 28th in the 32-team league at 64, so there's 6,000 more fans per game. I think you and I both agree that will go up. True or false, next season, so in 2024 NFL season, this team is in the top half of NFL attendance.
The top half. Top 18.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll say top 18.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah. I think they're going to, and Jason Wright mentioned to me, in 2 off seasons, they hope local revenue wise, to be right in that middle of the pack.
Okay.
So I think that the projections within the next couple of years to be where everybody else is, and instead of kind of where they are now. So I think that's sort of the, attendance is up 30% right now, but and that's a reflection of obviously new ownership, but the team itself too.
Of course, that's the big variable, right? If this team is good, people will come, and if it's
I
not,
think they're still struggling a bit, the Commanders, but I think it looks like they're going in rebuilding mode as well. But yeah, man, we'll see how that shakes out.
This has been fun, Eric. People can obviously find your work at Sportico, and we'll have you back on at some point. But I do want to talk for a second about a video series that you do at Sportico, Business Beyond the Game, publishing weekly interviews, video series about athletes and executives. What the fun, interesting kind of side business opportunities. The new sports economy is kind of the way I think about what you're doing. Tell the folks what that looks like, and maybe some highlights of some interviews you've had recently.
Yeah, no, I think so. Business Beyond the Game weekly video cast, which is crazy. It's been like over 5 months already, which it's flown by. It's been a lot of fun every Friday. So right, different executives and athletes, current, former, from a range of different sports and leagues. And sometimes the conversations vary sometimes from their own personal triumphs and losses in business to their latest sort of endeavors, right? So I think it's a space for hopefully people can walk away, listeners, if you're a marketer, right? Maybe getting a piece of marketing advice from someone in the space who's doing it at a high level, or if you work with athletes and kind of understanding how they approach brand partnerships, and maybe you can get a nugget off that, right? So I think every episode hopefully offers just a little nugget that the viewer can or the listener can take away. So yeah, man, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of random guests at times. Sometimes there's not a lot of rhyme or reason, but yeah, I think it's been like we had Toto Wolff recently, and
I always tell Scott that I wish we had more athletes on this show. You get big names, right? You had Dwayne Wade on recently. You had Malcolm Jenkins on recently. I think the shows of yours that I think I've enjoyed the most are the athlete ones, just because I think it's still rare to get a big A-list athlete to sit down and talk not about the sport that he or she played. You had the Cavender twins on recently,
right.
Not about that, but talk about the business opportunities that they see. And there's so much fascinating stuff happening in current and former athlete. We talked about Magic earlier.
Yeah.
The business opportunities there. It's great to see them have a long form opportunity to have that conversation.
Well, Eben, like athletes of today, the modern athlete, it's the different than 20, 30 years ago. I mean, these are walking CEOs of their own brands, right? So I think as we get closer to that and people understand that, I think this platforms like Business Beyond the Game allow them to, kind of share their prowess, right, in business. I think some athletes don't get enough credit for how knowledgeable they are, and I think we can share more light on that through the program. And yeah, and I love the convergence of sports and entertainment as well, and where we're going. Athletes are more connected to fans more than ever. You see them launching their own production companies, and you see them, investing in really front-facing consumer products directly with their fans too. So, yeah, the modern athlete is just so much different, and Magic would agree with this, and others. It's just a different space now, and I think we have to look at athletes just a little bit. I think there was a time when athletes just go to practice and they would go home, right?
Yeah.
You go to practice and you go home. Now they're spending that time now doing so many other things, from marketing campaigns to doing their own production meetings to leading their own personal teams of portfolio companies. It's just a different time.
Dwayne Wade, when you talked to him, said two things to you that I still think about sometimes, and I think every athlete should think about. One, he said, if you have an opportunity to be in the room where decisions are made, even if you're not the one making the decisions, you should jump at that opportunity every time. And the second thing he said is that just because you are an athlete and maybe didn't get a business degree or maybe don't know so much about this doesn't mean that you don't have thoughts that are extremely valuable and are maybe better than the thoughts of the people that did get that degree and have been in this world for a long time. And I think that's super poignant, that I think a lot of athletes they're intimidated by the business world and think that because they don't have the educational pedigree or the experience in that world that they are going to be dramatically outmatched. And I think people like Dwayne, who's an investor in the Jazz, an investor in the WNBA team in Chicago, I think he is hearing him say that, I think would really resonate with a lot of athletes who are maybe intimidated by that exact thing.
Yeah, no, a lot. I've talked to so many athletes, right? You know, a little insecure, right? You didn't go to Wharton, right? You didn't, so I know a lot of athletes, you feel a little weird about it, and some of them even regret not taking the time with limited partners and owners, because when you're a pro athlete, NFL, you have access to some of the biggest and brightest minds in business who are, ownership or, other aspects of local communities and, dignitaries. So, I think more athletes now are getting it where they're like, all right, I need to take advantage of this time, and I need to, pick the brain of some of these people who I'm around who are, highly intelligent and, know things in spaces that they don't know, quite frankly, right? So I think that's kind of the mindset shift we're seeing with the modern athlete.
I'll end it with a quick story on that exact point. I was at an event earlier this year where a marketing executive was talking about the Katie Ledecky Got Milk ad campaign, the one where she swam across the pool with the milk on her head. And the way that swimmers swim, their heads don't move. She's able to swim across the entire pool with a glass of chocolate milk on her head that doesn't spill. And it was her idea that they kind of got her in a pool. They were brainstorming some things, and she was like, what if I just swim across the pool with the milk on my head and it doesn't spill? And the well-experienced, well-educated marketing people just had no idea that was a thing, right? And it turned out to be this really indelible ad. I remembered it when they were talking about it. And that was an idea of hers, right? That nobody there was going to come up with except for the person who had been in the pool that understood exactly how all that stuff works. So yeah, I think from a creative standpoint, from a business standpoint, there's so much that a lot of athletes have to offer that I think just starting to be unlocked, and Business Beyond the Game is a good place for people who are curious about that to learn more. Eric, this was fun. We'll have you back on at some point soon for sure. He is Eric Jackson. He's on Twitter at EP Jackson. I am Eben Novi-Williams on Twitter at Novi_Williams. The show is produced by Aaron Greenewald. Thank you very much to Aaron. Sportico's digital media editor, Cora Veltman, would like you to know that you can follow the show at Sporticast, which is the hub of the Sportico Media Network.